Hello. In between all these Soviet DDs and all this ranked play, I decided to feature a ship that I felt like I didn't give the proper justice to the last time I covered it. It's of course the Montana. And now I'm still using the same build, the same captain perks, the same modules, the same upgrades and everything as I did in my 0.60 commentary. I can link it below if you're wondering what build I'm using. Now, I felt like I didn't really give the ship justice because I still see people act like this overall is a bad ship, whereas the Montana is quite a strong ship, in fact. The only weakness it really has is how it deals with other tier 10 battleships. For example, the Yamato will overmatch its bow, and the Yamato has a much easier time citadeling it, and whereas the Montana will struggle to penetrate the armor on the Yamato in return. And the Kurfürst, well, it has kind of taken over the brawling role from the Montana. The Montana used to be the best brawler, but then the Kurfürst came in with its massive secondaries, Hydro and Turtleback, making it extremely hard to citadel. So the Montana lost a lot of ground there. So yes, it still struggles against other tier 10 battleships. But that does by no means mean that it's a weak battleship. It's most certainly is not, and it's a massive threat to any other ships on the server. And I feel like people tend to underestimate this a bit much. In fact, I've been playing the Montana a lot more lately because I quite enjoy it, because it's not as straight up face roll as the Yamato is, where you can just point and click and you get massive damage. Or the Kurfürst, where the Kurfürst feels too big and clumsy right now. I've been quite enjoying playing the Montana as of late. Now, the enemy has two battleships giving broadside. I picked the Amagi, of course. The Amagi does have turtleback armor these days, which means at close range it's quite hard to citadel it. However, at these ranges, when the shells are able to plunge, you have no issues bypassing that turtleback and just punishing the ship heavily in something like a Montana. The Iowa, the North Carolina, they can pretty much all pull it off. I think even smaller caliber guns can citadel the Amagi at these ranges. At close range, of course, the turtleback kicks in, but these ranges not really an issue. It looks like they're about to collide, so I'm just gonna throw the shells in between them both. Yeah, Bismarck slowed down, so he ate the brunt of the damage instead. Bismarck, of course, at this range, maybe you can citadel him, you can bypass his turtleback, but most of the time you're still just going to be able to do heavy damage to him, whereas not landing citadels. Now the enemy, in case you didn't notice, the enemy does have a Yamato, and if you look at the minimap, you can see that he's actually setting up for a very fairly offensive position near B, where his bow is pointed basically towards our entire fleet, and his broadside is protected by the islands, which is a fairly good position. Citadeling the Amagi again. You can't give that much broadside to something like a Montana. I'm of course running the reduced dispersion module, but we're still talking 12 guns on a 30-second reload timer, so that's a lot of damage that's going to be railing in. And I mean, we're what? 4 minutes into the game and I've already done 63,000 damage to these two battleships. So they have been crippled quite heavily. And that's just, of course, my damage. So people still tend to underestimate the Montana, like quite heavily underestimate it. In fact, when they see a Yamato, they avoid and turn, and they don't really even want to take the fight. But when they see a Montana, for some reason, they tend to still underestimate it, which I'm perfectly fine with, because if you underestimate this thing, you're in for a world of pain. Now, the anti-air on the ship is... It's supposed to be its strength, but really the biggest issue right now is that you can't really defend yourself against the carrier. I mean, you have enough anti-air that carriers will rarely choose to pick on you first, because it will cost them planes. But if a carrier really wants to kill you, if you don't have help, you are going to die. There is little doubt about that. If you notice, by the way, my positioning here, I'm using the islands to hide myself, so I'm constantly shooting, but I'm in fact not detected. And that's because I'm arcing my shells over the islands, and of course I'm using the islands to protect me from torpedoes, from things like the Benson, which was contesting A. Hopefully my cruisers will be able to kill him, although it's looking a bit shaky. Donskoy, showing broadside, gonna see if I can punish him. This is a very awkward angle to shoot at because he's sailing towards me, so you have to not only predict his horizontal movement but also his vertical movement. Especially if he makes small turns like he did, suddenly your aim is completely off, because I think it's one of the hardest angles to shoot at in general. He turns away, says in chat, no Flamu, no. But I'm gonna of course go for him again, because the Donskoy is a massive threat to my DDs. In general, in a battleship, you should always try to focus the enemy radar cruisers first. Radar cruisers are a huge threat to all your DDs, and they can cripple and kill your DDs very easily, and your DDs will love you for it if you always focus them first. So I always try to pick a fight with them first and try to make life easier for my DDs. And of course, if you do get smoked up yourself, or someone smokes up and you sail into the smoke, you'll be able to use it yourself as well if the radar cruisers are dealt with. I am detected. Of course, there's the Yamato. You can see I need to be very careful with always angling. The enemy has all the capture points, which is a bit problematic. That's because their DD is pushed quite aggressively into the capture points, and they were able to secure them. Now, Yamato always angle. Yes, he can overmatch you, but you don't want to give him full bow on, and you don't want to give him full broadside either. You want to give him an angle where he's forced to shoot at your broadside and where you can bounce it. So yes, you can bounce shells. I'm going for the blind shot at the Minotaur instead of shooting the Bismarck, in case you were wondering where I was aiming, and I did in fact land one over a pen. I am slowing down though, because with the Fletcher and the Minotaur there's a high probability of torpedoes being shot, and I don't feel like sailing right into the torps, so I'm stopping my ship and going to reverse. Minotaur's smokes runs out, and he is forced to flee, of course. Now, you don't need to be afraid of shooting at Minotaurs when they're sailing away like this. You can easily, if they sail straight away like this guy does, just aim right above them and shoot. Your plunging fire, as you can see, will plunge your shells from above straight through his deck and into his citadel. So that guy was in fact fairly lucky that he managed to survive that, because I did what, 35-36k damage. One more penetration and I would have one-shot him. So he was very lucky to get away. I did eat 2 of his torps though, but ultimately I do feel like I came out on top in that fight. Amagi hasn't learned his lesson. Isn't this the same guy that I double citadel or got 2 citadels on earlier? He is turning away at least. And this time he manages to bounce most of it. Now, I've been waiting for my chance. Of course, the issue here is there's a cyclone hitting soon. So pushing right into a Yamato, you can see this Yamato is nailing me from range. Pushing right into a Yamato is extremely risky in a Montana. But I've been waiting patiently here. I don't care that they have the cap advantage. I'm just waiting for this cyclone to hit. The warning came a while ago and the cyclone is striking now. So meanwhile, while I'm waiting, I'm just taking shots at anything that shows itself to me and making sure I remain angled towards that Yamato. He has disappeared. He disappeared from my vision. And it looks like, you see my vision is starting to disappear. If you look at the minimap, you can see chunks of my vision just disappeared and it's disappearing again. That means, of course, the cyclone is striking, and I'm going to use this to my advantage. Cyclone is striking, which means we finally have the stealth. And when it comes to a straight up brawling fight, if you manage to close the distance with the Yamato, you have a fairly good shot in the Montana. But otherwise you might struggle. I write in chat, push B now, together, B, 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 and two battleships on my team say affirmative. That's always good, so hopefully I will have people with me, because this is of course the time we need to capitalize on. B is fairly clear of enemies, and the cyclone has struck, which means that the Yamato won't be able to punish me when I push in, and I'll be able to close the distance. So there are advantages to cyclones, big advantages, especially if you're in a Montana. Usually battleships tend to complain about cyclones, but especially for a Montana, it's fantastic. Oh, Benson. Instantly take the shot. Fairly easy shot, because you have 12 guns, and Montana is really good at deleting DDs, especially close range. You can just one-shot them very easily, just because of the sheer amount of shells you can pour out. And now Yugo finds their Minotaur. I think he was a bit too eager sailing into them, because, well, I think the island might have hit the Minotaur, so he gets wrecked by him, and we lose our Shimakaze to their gearing. So that's of course an issue. And here I make a fairly large miscalculation, and that's of course, we just saw a Minotaur, And I don't take into account that, yes, of course, the Minotaur might have launched blind torps, which is exactly what this Minotaur did. So he just threw out all his blind torps before he turned away. So I ate a massive chunk of damage, and I'm down to 13k HP. My heal is up though, and of course my repair. I haven't had any reason to use it, and I do manage to finish off their gearing as well. So at this point, I think that we have still a good push going on. The game is very, very even in terms of ships, and we're still behind on score. But I'm gonna take this moment when we got people pushing with me. I don't want to turn away, because usually if you turn away in random battles, the randoms are fairly afraid. Like random players are fairly afraid of pushing themselves. So if you turn away, usually they will slow down and the push will falter. So if you want to keep a push going, you kind of have to go ham. You have to go balls deep. No fear, no nothing. I'm hoping that this Yamato is still in the same position as he was last spotted, which was on the other side of these islands, because I'm now able to use these islands as cover. And I'm of course pushing hard into sea to help my Bismarck out, who's obviously fighting someone there. There are lots of smokes in here, which is of course to be expected with a gearing recently dead and a Minotaur somewhere. That's hardly surprising. But I can wait patiently and see if I might be able to take some shots here, because they don't know I'm here. I'm undetected. So, okay, the Yamato position is shown. More torpedoes coming our way. And finally, we get vision. The enemy Minotaur, full broadside like this, I think it gets hydroed by the Bismarck. And that's of course a very easy instant destruction of that Minotaur. However, now we get some real issues, namely an Iowa on my left and an Amagi on my right. The Amagi has less HP and the Iowa is still behind the island, so I quickly take the target priority as the Amagi. He has 9000 HP and he's fairly angled, so I aim above his hull and I aim for his superstructure and his guns. And I do the 9000 damage just by penetrating his superstructure and guns and doing the damage there. You shouldn't try to go for hull on those kind of angles, because most likely he will bounce it or you will struggle getting the damage you need. Now, however, I'm against Iowa. He gives me so much broadside that I try to go for his citadel right on, but he does turn in just in time to negate the damage. But he also used his guns, so I turn right and take my back guns into it, and I intentionally shoot his turrets. You notice that I cripple his turrets, and that breaks his guns. And that's a huge advantage in a brawling type of fight like this, the fact that he only has one gun now because the other one was broken. So the other gun is still reloading. And you might notice here, he is able to shoot one gun, but unable to shoot both guns. And he does do, what was it, 8,000–9,000 damage to me with his one gun, but because the other gun was broken, he was unable to fire it, and thus he was unable to kill me, whereas I managed to finish him off. So always keep in mind when you're in those kind of brawling type battles, or very close range battles, that damaging the enemy's guns is a very valid tactic, and it might in fact save your life like it did for me there. Now I finally got a really good position on this Yamato. This Yamato is, however, giving massive broadside to the North Carolina. In fact, he's giving massive broadside to everything. He's sat in this position for too long, I feel, and now he's just being surrounded by everyone from everywhere. And that's of course one of the problems. If you hold a position for too long in a battleship, the enemy team will just flank and surround you, especially in a cyclone where you can't use the great strengths of the Yamato, which is the long range and penetrative power at long ranges against the enemy. Donskoy shows up. I go for him right away in case he tries to torp me. Don't really get the hits I want. 2 overpens and a bounce, very underwhelming. But I turn my guns in since I want to see if I can finish him off and maybe secure my 7th kill. Amusingly, of course, when you give broadside, that also brings all your secondaries into the battle, so all my secondaries start opening up. And hilariously, just before my shells land, my secondaries actually kill him off, which not only gives me high caliber, but also close quarters expert. So it ends up being only 180k damage in this game, which isn't that special, but amusingly 7 kills in this fairly aggressive and fairly short game. Team score wise, 2.7k base XP, not really that much, but it's always amusing scoring 7 kills in a battleship that many people tend to really look down upon and don't really want to rate as highly as any of the others, even though it's still a very considerable threat. I mean, I hope you keep giving me broadsides if you're facing me when I play this ship. I love it. I greatly enjoy it. Moving on damage-wise, honestly, not really anything that special. Of course, Minotaur tanking 62.6k of my damage is pretty ridiculous, but then again, that's just the way the Minotaur heal works. It can eat so much of your damage. 59 hits, 180k damage. Overall, a pretty damn fun game. Anyway, if you guys want to know what build I'm using, click my Montana commentary in the description. That's where I go over my 0.60 Montana build, which is the same one that I use on my Yamato, and it's been so far working very well for me. Anyway, that was all for me. I'll talk to you guys later.